Well, good morning, FCCT. How are you guys doing? Good, good. And so it's been a little cold, right? A little cloudy, a little rainy. And so we're having our tailgating inside today because we weren't sure what the weather was going to be. We thought there was a chance it could be windy, something like that. And so we are having it over there. And we have some Hebrew National hot dogs that have been grilled over charcoal. We've got some cornhole championship going on. This is the time where we decide who is the cornhole champion of our church. It could be you. It could be you. Even if you've never played, it still could be you. Because that's only the finest talent here today. Ken. Only the finest talent here. And so, it could be you. You might walk away with the trophy. Yes, we have trophies. We actually have trophies. So you're going to want to be a part of that. And so join us. It's not going to take a long time. If you've got other things to do, just make them, push them back. Be a part of what we're doing here. Joshua chapter 7 is where we're going to be. And we've been going through this sermon series called Like No Other. And what we're talking about in this sermon series is that, there's a lot of ways that you can look at salvation. And one of the ways that we often do is we look at it through a theological perspective or we look at it through a doctrinal perspective. But what we don't often understand is that we can very much look at salvation through a relational perspective. And in doing so, what we find is that salvation is something different than what we expected. Whereas a lot of times we look at salvation as, I don't want to go to hell, I want to go to heaven. And we look at it kind of almost geographically. I want to change my geographical destination. What we find is that salvation is actually drawing near to God and being in a relationship with Him where He is loved by us, we are loved by Him. Of course, the love from Him comes first. And so we're looking at it from that perspective throughout this sermon series. Last week we talked about Jesus as a friend like no other because He's our Redeemer. And we talked about the price that was paid for our redemption. To be redeemed means to be bought with a price. And so we were in bondage to our sin. We were a slave to sin. We were in bondage to the fear of death. We talked about a lot of those things that we were slaves to, and we have been purchased. And the way that we're structuring the sermon series is after we go through one of these attributes of Jesus, we go through, because this is a sermon series about relationship, we go through what it is that we need to do to respond to that. If Jesus is our Redeemer, how do we respond? If Jesus has purchased us with His blood, how do we respond? And the way that we should respond is to be devoted. And so we're going to talk about what it means to be devoted. And so we're going to look at Joshua chapter 7, verse 1, because there's an interesting story about what it means to be devoted. So Joshua chapter 7, if you recall from your Old Testament history, remember that Israel kind of became a nation in the land of Egypt, but they ended up going into bondage to the Egyptians. The Egyptians were enslaving them. And then Moses was raised up by God, and he led the people out of Egypt and into the wilderness. Now remember, the wilderness should have been just a brief trip through the wilderness to get to the promised land. But because of Israel's unbelief, it ended up taking 40 years. And a whole generation was basically left behind there because they had no faith. Now, what's happened in the book of Joshua is that there is now movement. We're going into the promised land. That generation has died off, and Joshua is leading the people into the promised land. And remember that they have to conquer this land that God has showed them. But everything isn't great. Previous to Joshua chapter 7, you have the story of Jericho. Do you guys remember the story of Jericho? And in the story of Jericho, we have this great walled city, and God basically takes care of that problem for them. All they have to do is be obedient, and they march around the city. The walls come down. They're able to tackle this amazing, difficult place, and they're able to do it with God's mighty hand of power being shown. Well, what happens is that they come to this town, this little tiny town, after taking care of this huge problem, this huge walled city that was very powerful. They come to this tiny town called Ai, and when they go up against Ai, they get massacred. They lose. And they're like, what's going on? Like, I don't understand. How could we possibly lose this? And the reason is because they have not been good about understanding God and about the devoted things. So we'll look at Joshua chapter 7, verse 1. It says, the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel. So this guy named Achan, he's taken some of the devoted things. And you ask yourself, well, what's a devoted thing? Now, as the people are going into the promised land and as they're conquering the people who live there, certain things and in certain towns, things are devoted to God. And that happens in two different ways. One is things can be devoted to destruction, or things can be devoted to the treasury of God. But either way, but God is basically saying, as the devoted things, He's saying, these things belong to me. And that's why this is the corollary to what it means to be redeemed. If Jesus has purchased you with His blood, how do you have the relationship with God? How do you have the relationship with Jesus in that? That means you belong to Him. You're devoted to Him. If He has purchased you with His blood, what does that mean on your side? It means you are His. Because the thing is that if He's purchased you with His blood, but not His, that purchasing has done you no good. You're living as if it doesn't matter. You're living as if it doesn't exist. And so we'll look today at what it means to be His. And so we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at, first of all, the profane. And we're going to see that we live in a profane world. Then we're going to look at what it means to be devoted. And finally, we're going to look at what it means to be consecrated. And those words are very important words. And as we look at this, I want you to kind of think about your life and where do you fit in here? Is the life you're living now, is it in the profane? Or is it in the devoted? Or is it in the consecrated? I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's a big push right now to craft things, right? You can go and you can get a craft sandwich, which is a sandwich they charge you $18 for, right? Or you can go get craft beer. You can go get, craft pretty much anything. And I was thinking about this, and why do we live in a world like this now where these craft things are so big? It's so important. And I think one of the reasons is that people get tired of living in a box. They get tired of being a number. They get tired of living in a profane world. And so I want to talk about why this is the case. And let's talk about the profane for a minute. What does it mean to be profane? How many of you guys have heard the word profane? Right? And usually we hear it in the idea of a profanity. But the thing is that it has a lot bigger meaning than that. The profane means to be common. It means to be tread upon. So something that's profane is common. It's like the dirt on the ground. It's common. You just tread upon it. You walk on it. It's not important. It has no value. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. It's not valuable, or it's not unique, let's say. It has no identity that makes it special. And it was the word for a threshold in the ancient world. You know the threshold of your house, that thing you walk on every day? That's what it means. That's what profane means. And the problem that we run into is we live in a world that is profane. And you can see this everywhere. And one of the ways that you can see it most clearly in our modern world, in our modern cities, and it makes its weight upon your life feel most urgent, is in the way that our cities are designed and the way that our architecture exists. There was a guy named Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, and he was known as the Crow, and he's considered one of the fathers of modern architecture. And one of the things that he did was he came up with, and him and his followers, they came up with basically all the different dimensions and rules of what you needed to have a livable house. Right? So the idea is when they were doing urban planning, they said, well, we're going to have so many people in this city. How much space does each person need? And they had a formula for exactly what you needed to have a house. And so what you find is that in a lot of cities, especially ones that were built in like the 20s through the 70s, is that you find that you have all these tall apartment buildings. Have you seen them? Do you know what I'm talking about? Tall apartment buildings where it's just, everything's a square and everything's plain and everything's concrete. You guys know what I'm talking about? New York? A lot of places. And in fact, in a lot of European cities, they actually bulldozed really nice old houses and they put up these just monstrosities. And in fact, one of the things that the Crow wanted to do was he wanted to bulldoze Paris and just basically put up all these apartments. Because you know Paris, it's such an ugly town. You see this a lot in the communist east of Europe. And what they did was they looked at complete efficiency. Why do the buildings look the way they do? Is because it's the most efficient way to house somebody. There's nothing wasted, right? We have exactly what we need and nothing more. We have a box, and that box is stacked on all the other boxes, and it looks identical to all the other boxes, because when it looks identical to all the other boxes, it's the easiest to build. Because you go to the worker and you say, here's what you're going to build, and you're just going to do that over and over and over and over and over again. That's what it means to be profane. It means common. Everything about our world now is common. It's a world of complete efficiency. And this world of complete efficiency is at odds. It's at war with the biblical world. Because the biblical world is not a world of complete efficiency. In fact, it's a world of intended wastefulness. Now that might shock you to say that the biblical world is a world of intended wastefulness, but I guarantee you that that's what it is, and that's the kind of world that we want to live in. Because we don't want to live in a profane world. A profane world gives you exactly the same as it gives everybody else. There's nothing special about you. How many people dreamed when you were a kid of working in an office where you could have a cubicle that's exactly like everybody else's cubicle? That's what you dreamed of, right? You thought to yourself, man, if only I could have this future. If only I could have exactly the same car as everybody else, in exactly the same color, and live in a subdivision where every house looks exactly like everybody else's house. Have you guys ever driven into a new subdivision and gotten completely lost because everything looks the same? Well, what do I mean by a world of intended wastefulness? What I mean by that is we have lost a worshipful world. Because worship is a waste of time. I say that knowing that as a church we resource worship a lot. And we value everything that our worship leaders, our worship team does. Worship, in fact, I read a book, the title of the book was Worship, a Royal Waste of Time. Well, why is worship a waste of time? Well, worship is a waste because sacrifice is a waste. It's a purposeful waste. When you sacrifice something, you're setting it aside and you're saying, I'm not going to use this. In fact, in the ancient world, the Israelites would go and they would offer a sacrifice to God, and it was basically setting aside something that you wouldn't get. In fact, it would be burned on an altar so that no one would get it. Why? Because it belonged to God Himself. In fact, it's not just that all worship is a waste, every celebration is a waste. I want to say that very clearly. Every celebration is a waste. Let's say that the Crow is designing all of our birthday parties. All of our birthday parties, right? Everybody gets the same present. It's wrapped in white paper. Why? Because that's the cheapest. It's the most efficient. Right? And everybody has the same meal. Everybody has the same people over, right? Here's the thing. What do you do when you have a party? How many of you guys remember going to parties when you were kids? Yeah? You remember that? What did you do? What kind of things did you look forward to when you went to a party as a kid? What's that? Games, right? Games. Games are a waste, aren't they? They're a complete waste. The thing is that you have better things to do. You could be working. You could be in your cubicle like everybody else. And you put on party hats. You guys remember? What is the purpose of a party? The thing is, imagine the guy going to the bank and he's saying, I'm going to start a party hat company. What do you do with them? Well, you put them on at a party. What do you do with them after the party? You throw them in the trash. This sounds like a stupid business. But then he goes into business and make party, and everybody buys the party hats, and you go to a party and you put on the party. You understand what I'm talking about, right? You have a child's party, and maybe he likes Spider-Man, maybe he likes whatever, and you put up the stuff, and you put up all the decorations, and you put up the streamers and all that kind of stuff. And what do 3 hours later? You take it all down and you throw it in the garbage. If you don't understand the connection between that and worship, you're missing something. How do you show the child that he has value? How do you show the child? Think about this. How do you show the child that he has value without spending something on him? Here's the thing. Can you imagine going to your birthday party? You have your 9th birthday party. And you walk in and you see that there's new wallpaper up on the wall, and there's a new couch, and there's new stuff. And the parents go, "Hey, look, we spent all this money on your party." But because we didn't want to just throw the things away, we just bought stuff that we really need. We got some new hangers upstairs. Hangers. Hanging them around the house, right? We needed new hangers. We got a new plant. There's a new plant in the corner. Don't you feel valued? Do you see my point? Is the child going to feel valued? No. Because efficiency is the opposite of valuing. The waste is the point. If you go to an old city, what you find is they have buildings, and the buildings have all kinds of decorations. And somebody spent a lot of time carving those decorations into stone. They wasted money on that. Why? Because it lent value to the human spirit. It was a testimony to humanity, to the people that lived in the city, saying, you are worth something. The people who work in this building, the people who live in this building are worth something. They're not just economic units. They're not just interchangeable. These people are special. They have value, and we're going to show that value. We're going to honor them by giving them something more than what they need. You see, here's the thing that's so important to understand is that all worship, all valuing comes out of extravagance, not efficiency. And we all know this, whether we know that we know it or not. Because when you get a gift, you want the extravagant gift, not the efficient gift. And guys, let me tell you this. The best way to get in trouble with your wife is to give her the efficient gift. She knows. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7 through 10. It says, in him we have redemption through his blood. What kind of price was paid for us? The efficient price? The extravagant price. Do you know that the price that was paid for you was the greatest price that's ever been paid for anything? Think about that for a second. What's the most extravagant gift you've ever been given? What is the most that has ever been spent on you? It comes nowhere near what God did for you in Jesus Christ. The most extravagant gift, the most extravagant price that was ever paid was paid for you. Jesus really died for you. In him we have redemption through his blood, for the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. Not the efficiency of his grace. God is extravagant. Why? Because of his love for us. It's the riches of his grace. It's the most extravagant price ever paid. Why? Because that is the nature of love. Love doesn't seek efficiency, it seeks extravagance, always. When we worship, we don't worship here because it's the most efficient thing to do. We try to be extravagant in our waste. We try to be extravagant in the price that we pay. We want the best possible worship. Why? How can we worship a God who has paid the ultimate price for us by being stingy and efficient with Him? That's not the way that you worship. That's not the nature of the relationship of salvation. The nature of the relationship of salvation is that God has blessed you extravagantly, has paid the highest price possible in the blood of Jesus. And you, because your heart is welling with love for Him, are extravagant toward Him. People call that a waste. It's not a waste. I've been saying it's a waste. Hopefully you know. Hopefully you're clued in. It's not a waste. It's love. It's love. And if you're only looking at numbers and dollar signs, it appears to all the world like a waste. But it is not a waste. It's how we show value. God has shown us the value that He places on us. He has shown us the depth and extent of His love. Now we, if we're going to be part of a relationship, show the extent of our love for Him. We didn't start this, He did. And if He had started it efficiently, then we could show our love efficiently, but He started it extravagantly. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18 and 19 says, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which He has called you, what are the riches of His glorious inheritance in the saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of His power toward us who believe according to the working of His great might. If God had been efficient with us, we could be efficient with Him. But because He's been extravagant with us, because He has given us all the riches that He has, then the only thing left to do is for us to give Him every ounce of riches that we have. It's part of a relationship of lavishing riches to the glory of the beloved. You see, that's the issue. When you love something, you want it glorified. And you will spend whatever it takes to do that. And that's actually how you know that love is genuine and that love exists. Knowing that you are loved, that you are special, comes from the waste. You are not just an economic unit. You are not just the same. And I think that's why this craft thing has become such a thing, is people are tired in our world of being treated that way. And if they only knew the extent of God's love for them, they would see their lives in a different light. In the Bible, there was an idea that you should not ever take God's name in vain. And when I was growing up, I thought it meant not saying the word God, right? We would have TV shows on when I was a kid, and somebody would say, "Oh, God." And I remember in our household, that was... And I thought that that was all that there was, but as I got older, I realized that to take not God's name in vain means something completely different than it. It means don't take God's name upon yourself to no effect. Don't let Jesus redeem you to no effect. Don't let God lavish you with the riches of His inheritance to no effect. You see, if God lavishes you with His riches, then there should be a difference. There should be a difference in your life. Your life ought to be transformed. You see, there should be something happen. Imagine that somebody has given you, imagine that your father came into this glorious inheritance. Imagine that Elon Musk just decided to sign over all his wealth to your father, and your father decided that he was going to give that to you. And imagine that nothing changed in your life. You ate the same food, you dressed the same, you drove the same cars, but more importantly, you gave the same gifts to your father that you had when you were not rich. You see, that would be to profane the gift. To have the love of riches in God lavished on you for no riches or no difference means that the gift has done nothing. It is as if the gift didn't exist. It's of no account. It's of no worth. There's nothing special to it. You see, you can't stay the same after you've been redeemed. So what do? You are devoted. You see, Achan's problem was this, that Achan took something that was devoted to God, that was given over to God, and he treated it as if it was something the same as everything else. And God takes that so seriously that Achan and all of his family perished. And you say to yourself, well, that's terrible. And I remember as a kid reading the story and thinking, that's terrible, and having these weird thoughts about God, like, is God a terrible person? And it wasn't until later when I realized that here's the thing. If you want God to value you because you're His, if you want God to protect you, if you want God to watch over you, if you want God to value and give you, if you want God's redemption to be of some worth to you, then you have to understand that everything that belongs to God, He takes very seriously. Everything that belongs to God, He takes very seriously. Here, let me ask you this. Do you belong to God? Does anybody here belong to God? When you read the story of Achan, you start to understand exactly how seriously God takes that. And would you want it to be any other way? So let's talk about what it means to be devoted. Achan steals something devoted to God. The word is haram. It's haram. And what's interesting about that word is that it's often used to be put under a curse. It's to be put under a ban or put under a curse. And so what they would say is that thing is haram, it's cursed, it's banned. And the thing is that you might think, well, that thing is evil then, right? If somebody said, hey, I'm going to give you this gold bar or this silver bar, but it's cursed, would you take it? Would you? How many here would take it? Okay, Ken. A few, okay, all right. Now, when something is cursed, do you normally think of it as evil? Yeah, you do, don't you? Like this is an evil thing. No, actually, the interesting thing is to be under the ban, to be cursed, it's actually, it doesn't mean that. It, at least in this instance, what it means is that this thing is cursed to you. Right? It's not necessarily the thing is cursed in itself, it's cursed to you. And what's really fascinating about this idea of devoted is that it has to do with the fact that God has placed His seal of ownership on this thing. Now, it's interesting because Israel goes in the land and some things are destroyed that are devoted to God and some things are put into God's treasury. So God will take the things, He'll say, when you go into this town, all the things of value, they are devoted to God. And so like take the gold and silver, put it into the treasury, everything else, put it in the middle of the town and burn it. And you think to yourself, well, why does God burn some things and keeps the other things? And it's interesting because in order to understand that, you have to understand this conception of what it means to be God's. In Leviticus chapter 27, we're going to look at verse 21 and 28. And both of these use the word haram, but they use it in a little bit different sense. It says in verse 21 of Leviticus 27, it says, but the field, when it is released in the Jubilee, shall be a holy gift to the Lord, like a field that has been devoted. The priest shall be in possession of it. So this field becomes devoted to God, and so it belongs to God. It's not evil, it's not bad, it's not going to be destroyed in some way. Devoted means it just belongs to God. In verse 27 or verse 28 of chapter 27, it says, but no devoted thing that a man devotes to the Lord, or anything that he has, whether man or beast, or of his inheritance or inherited field, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing must be holy to the Lord. That's saying that once you devote something to God, you can't try to buy it back. You can't say, oops, I want that back. No, once it's devoted to God, it's God. Why? Because God takes seriously what is His. And again, we want that because we are His. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 21, we have it used in a completely different way. It says, "But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." What it's saying here is that there were some things that were devoted to destruction. They were devoted to God, and they were supposed to be burned up. And rather than burning them, they thought, hey, it's more efficient if we take it. So how do we understand this idea of being devoted? Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and this is the last one in this section that we'll talk about here, verse 12 through 15 helps us to understand this. And I really want you to catch this, because if you want your life devoted, if you're saying to yourself, God has redeemed me through the blood of Jesus Christ, He has paid the highest price possible to me, I want to respond to that in a way that honors Him. I want to have a response to Him that is loving, because of what His love has done for me, then you need to understand this. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "Now if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire." Now, you might say to yourself, that helps me not at all. And that's fair. What is it saying? It's saying, look, you're building on the foundation. The foundation is the salvation of God He's given you. And as you build up, sometimes you build with precious stones and gold and things that are really valuable. And sometimes you build with wood, hay, and straw. And He's saying that fire is going to reveal what you build. And that fire is God's presence. The presence of God is going to reveal what you have built in your life. It's going to reveal whether your life has been devoted to Him. And the thing that's important to understand about this is that the presence of God, the fire of God, has an effect that's different on different things. On things that are glorious, God's fire causes them to glow and become more glorious. And on things that are common, God causes those things to be burnt up. What does that mean? It means this. A loving response to God is one that gives everything to Him. Everything. And you might look at your life and say, well, there's a lot in my life that shouldn't be given to God. No, you give God everything. You're going to give God everything. And when that presence of God comes into your life, that presence of God is going to cause the glorious things in your life to become more glorious. And He's going to cause those things that aren't glorious to burn, to be destroyed. And that's why most people are not going to devote themselves to God. Because a lot of people have spent their life falling in love with things in their life that are worthless. And if there's one thing I want you to hear today, it's that. A lot of people have spent their life falling in love with things that are worthless. And God is going to burn those things up. When you devote those things to God, they're going to be devoted to destruction. And you might say, but I love that thing. Let me tell you this, that thing doesn't love you. That thing does not love you. If you want to be destroyed, then give your heart to things that God hates and wants to destroy. And all of us have given our hearts to some of those things. And all of us have in our lives some of those things that God hates and wants to destroy. And while we love them because they make us feel good, they are making all the people around us miserable. They are turning the world into something that God despises. Those things in our life have got to go. And if you devote yourself to God, He's going to make sure that they go. Give God everything. God builds His kingdom from the spoils of the wicked. That's what He always does. So what happens is the Israelites would go into a town and they would conquer this town, and God would build His kingdom from the spoils of the wicked, the spoils of that town. What that means is this, that the things that were valuable and glorious, God would bring in and He would put them in the treasury of the temple. He would build His kingdom with that. But the things that weren't glorious, He would burn. Here's the thing, it can't be any other way. It can't be any other way. If God came in and He built His kingdom out of just what was there and He took all of it, then the kingdom he built would look just like the kingdom he's replacing. Here's the thing, when God redeems you and you are his, he's not just going to leave you the same. That would not be to give you the riches of his glorious inheritance. He's not going to leave you the same. What he's going to do is he's going to take the things in you that reflect him, and he's going to make them even stronger. He's going to make them even reflect him more. He's going to make those things more glorious. But what he's going to do with the rest is he's going to burn it. Why? Because it doesn't have any place in his glorious kingdom. And if he left it there, then your life would look exactly like it did before. And his kingdom would not reflect his glory. It would just reflect however you were. We don't do this. This isn't a work that we engage in to win God's favor. God's favor is already upon us. He's already redeemed us. This is our response of love to the love that's been shown to us. God can transform your life if you devote yourself to him. He can renew you and remake you. The question is, have you given him everything? Have you given him your sins? Have you given him your failures? Have you given him your addictions? Have you given him that anger that's a problem? Have you given him that lust? Have you given him all the self-doubts? Have you given him the anxiety? Have you given him all those things? Do you want him just to carry that over into the kingdom? Do you want to be the same person you were? Or in God's kingdom, do you want to be renewed? That's not what salvation is. Salvation is a relationship with him that reflects the glory of who he is. Salvation means a transformation to his glory. And that's how God gives us the riches that are found in Jesus Christ. Well, finally, we need to, in the last couple minutes we have left, talk about what it means to consecrate. So another word that's associated with God's things is kadesh, or to consecrate, to make holy. And the interesting thing is things were made holy by the application of blood and by the application of oil. What consecrated things are, they're things that are fit for service in the presence of God. They're things that are fit for service in the temple. Because God cares about what is his, he lavishes his glory upon those things. You see, when you're fit for service in God's temple, that means you reflect who he is. You have been lavished with his glory. And man, everybody wants to be lavished with his glory. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "And the four living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.'" And I remember reading that as a kid and being creeped out. I mean, think about it. 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, and they're full of eyes. You know, here's the thing I love about that, is those things, they're not living in boxes. They don't occupy cubicles. They're not sitting there in their cubicles typing out on their, the TPS reports. Is it TPS reports? They're not doing that. These things are incredible. These things are unique. They're like nothing else. And that's what happens around the throne room of God, is everything becomes itself. And it becomes gloriously itself. And you have these 4 living creatures who are crazy in their appearance, and they have these eyes all around them, and I look at them, I think just how magnificently terrible. And they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Why do they do that? It's not because there aren't reports to file. It's because there's nothing better than reflecting the glory of God. There's nothing better than lavishing God with praise, who has lavished us with the blood of Christ. This week, in our conversations with God that you can find on our website, you can find them on our Facebook page, they're daily devotionals that we go through. We're going to be talking about what does it mean to have your life devoted in a practical way. If you say to yourself, I want to respond to the redemption of God, I want my life to be transformed. What are some of the steps that you need to take? We're going to be walking through those this week, and so we invite you to be a part of those. And as we wrap up here, we always talk about how you can believe and belong and become. And the simple thing to believe here is that you have been redeemed. And it sounds simple, but it's so hard to wrap your head around the fact that the highest price that could exist has been paid for you. It's a hard thing to wrap our heads around. We don't want to believe that it's true, and yet it is. So how do you belong? Well, you belong to Him. He has bought you. Be His. Turn your life over to Him. Be devoted. And let that devotion end in consecration. Become consecrated. Live in His presence.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.